You, Rob, and thank you all for coming to hear this talk. When Rob initially reached out to me to present on the topic of faith and film, he left it very open-ended. And initially, I was thinking about, maybe inspirational films or that had, well-made inspirational films that had discussed topics of faith. But then I got to thinking more about some of the research topics that I'm interested in, which particularly include documentary filmmaking and intersections of faith. A lot of the films I have made have featured characters of faith and showcase that. And in graduate school, I did a lot of research on a film that was still fairly popular at the time called Jesus Camp, which was a 2006 documentary. And so what I'm going to be doing today is talking about it and framing it in how it's still relevant today, and how some ways it kind of predicted things that kind of became more commonplace, but also a little bit of criticism towards it, a little bit of manipulative editing that occurred in this film. And in this time of information literacy, where we all are trying to figure out what's true and what's not true, I do want to talk a little bit about how manipulative editing can take place in all forms of media, and to really evaluate things critically, even if they line up with how we view the world, or to still question those things, because while Jesus' film, everything in it is that happened is pretty much true, there are some Jesus Camp. By the way, I have COVID, so I'm a little bit out of it, and Rob, I forgot all about this talk, and so I wanted to do it though, but I'm well enough to give it. We're recovering, but forgive me if I cough or anything like that, because I just got ill a few days ago, or Friday. So anyways, while many of the things in the film are true, some things are slightly misrepresented, and there are a few things that are complete fabrications due to editing, and we're going to touch on those. I want to start off by showing a trailer for the film to give some context so you can see it. And the reason why I chose this, because I still believe it's topical, is if you look at the movement of the religious right over the years, and in our era, we can specifically think about the role that I think Trumpism has played and has invaded, in my mind, a lot of the evangelical church. And I say this as someone that grew up in an evangelical church and has great friends and family from those places, good people, but I think sometimes have fallen under the influence of misguided philosophy and perhaps taking politics and religion too far, where identifying as Republican becomes almost as important, or if not more important, than one's religion. I've seen interstate signs of come to our church, here's our political beliefs. Like, I've literally seen that. And I don't even know if they believe in Jesus, but I know they're pro-gun, pro-life, etc. Right. And so there's a danger in that, in becoming overly political. And this film kind of really was about that. It was a wake-up call saying, look at this, look what could become. However, some of it is misrepresented. We'll get into that. So let's watch the trailer. And this film too, in full, it's available in full on YouTube and a few other platforms. You can just Google it if you want to watch it later. But we'll watch the trailer here. So let me share my screen and set this up properly. And let me make sure I choose to share the audio here. One second here. There's an option I have to click to do that. Here we go. Share sound. Okay.
This is a sick old world. Kids, you gotta change things. Boys and girls can change the world? Absolutely.
I pledge allegiance to the Christian flag.
There are two kinds of people in the world: people who love Jesus and people who don't.
Speak the word of the Lord.
Where should we be putting our focus? I'll tell you where our enemies are putting it. They're putting it on the kids.
How long have you been a Christian?
At 5, I got saved.
Yeah?
Because I just wanted more of life.
You go into Palestine and they're taking their kids to camps like we take our kids to Bible camps, and they're putting hand grenades in their hands.
I got Jesus. Yes, I do. How about you? There's an excitement, yet there's a peace with it all, too. It's really cool. I really feel that we're a key generation to Jesus coming back. And we are a generation that needs to rise up and run with that baton.
Yeah.
How many of you want to be those who would give up their lives for Jesus?
We're being trained to be God's army.
Not enough!
You are the beginnings of a movement. Raise up righteous judges!
There's a new church like this every 2 days in America.
25% of the American population, that's about 80 million people.
If the evangelicals vote, they determine the election.
They've taken over the White House, Congress, the judiciary for a generation.
This is just the tip of the iceberg.
This means war! This means war! Are you a part of it or not?
All right. So the trailer is extremely well crafted from a entertainment perspective and getting people engaged. There's a lot of use of militant language and some very shocking and extreme clips there. And most all of these things did happen. There are a few cases, though, where there is some manipulative editing to create a completely false sequence of events based on what people featured in the film claim. And so we're going to be talking about that and touching on that. Okay, so I'm going to read some from a research paper, but I'm also going to talk and ad lib and give more context to things that I wrote about this film several years ago. So the 2006 controversial documentary film Jesus Camp tells the story of charismatic children's minister named Becky Fisher and her efforts to evangelize children and get them involved in social issues. The film was directed and produced by Heidi Ewing and Rachel Grady. They run a nonfiction film production company in New York City called Loki Films. It had a production budget of about $100,000 and it was picked up for distribution by Magnolia Pictures, which is a popular distributor of independent films. Through some justifiable actions and other unethical actions of the filmmakers, this originally neutral piece morphed into an advocacy documentary with an overpowering implicit message against the entanglement of politics and religion, which made it a national conversation. While some of the criticism against the subjects of the film is certainly valid, the analysis of the film that I'm going to present today will demonstrate to you a deeper understanding of the film and how the filmmakers did use editing practices to artificially create, in some cases, fake scenes or stronger misrepresentations of things in the film to better fit their message, their framing of the events. So when the filmmakers first approach Becky Fisher, the woman that's running the camp, they wanted to do a film that examined issues of faith through a child's eyes. That was how they presented themselves. That was what they wanted to do. They had a previous film that looked at a young boy whose faith was the bedrock of his life, and they wanted to seek out similar children with strong religious devotions for a new film. And so Becky looked at their previous work as most documentary subjects should. Look at the previous work of the director, see what they're doing, what's their intent, what's their goal. Because most of the time, a good documentary filmmaker is trying to explore an issue, and they don't really want to bring harm to a subject unless it's something that, is politically motivated or needs to be. Some cases it's valid, right? But most of the time, a documentary filmmaker is just looking to explore a subject and doesn't really want to bring harm or ridicule to the subject matter of the documentary filmmakers. So Becky kind of hoped that this film could highlight what she was doing and her work, and she thought it would be a good thing. Well, after shooting for about 9 months, the filmmakers came to her and said, we need more conflict. We have people interested in this film, but we need to have more conflict. We want to refocus and reframe the film around the ever increasing involvement of evangelical Christians in politics. Becky didn't really like this idea because she didn't view what she was doing as primary politically motivated. Okay. And I think that's fair for her to say that because in her mind, it's about winning souls for Christ. However, as you can see in the film, there are certainly times where political topics enter into the fray, but a documentary film is only what we see. And so if the majority of the clips relate to the more extreme things, which they will, because we're trying to make an interesting film, then it can kind of misrepresent the overall mindset of what, typically goes on in Becky's ministry and her life. As those that, maybe grew up in an evangelical church like myself, there's certainly times where we have militant imagery and things like I'm in the Lord's army. yes, sir. Remember that song, and we do pledge allegiance to the Christian flag, but it's in service and love. It doesn't end with in fighting. It's in service and love. So it's important to kind of keep all this in context too. So a lot of the things that happened in the film did happen, but we're usually seeing the most extreme things, and sometimes it's a little manipulative. And so it's easy in this film to watch it to misconstrue her primary motivations as being politically motivated. But I can understand where she thinks they're not. Some of the events we're going to discuss, they were created by the filmmakers. They instituted it. They said, hey, let's go do this. And they paid for people to go here or there, or they encouraged her to do things, to film. And these weren't things she necessarily would usually do. That's unethical. Typically, a filmmaker that's doing documentary will ask someone to do things they normally do on camera. That's fine. But if you ask someone to do something different, that's when you enter the era of reality television, where you push people to do things they normally wouldn't do for entertainment. So when filmmakers delve into misrepresentation for the sake of strengthening theme, ethical questions can be raised, because documentaries are consistently viewed as representations of truth by their audiences. There's a contractual agreement there, implicit contractual agreement, that what we're seeing is true. Otherwise, it's not a documentary. It's fake. Right. So we have to believe that what we're seeing is true for it to be a true documentary. We know that there's going to be some misrepresentation there always in a film, and they're not completely objective, but they're trying to be. They're trying to capture reality. So the restructuring of this film around this new theme of the evangelical involvement in politics meant that the filmmakers had to figure out a way to frame it around that. So what they did was they got in touch with a radio talk show host named Mike Papantonio, who he claims he's a Christian, but he is against a lot of the right-wing politics, and he wants to see those things be separate. And so he is the one that kind of sets up the film, and we hear his voice. And basically, we are kind of view him as sort of the representatives of the filmmaker's mindsets. He's kind of the one representing the more middle ground view, I guess you could say. And we're introduced to him first. So implicitly, we're kind of supposed to understand that he is the one that is the person of reason, that is telling us really what we should think and feel. Not really Becky, even though she's the primary protagonist, but Mike is the voice of reason. So they kind of set us up where already from the get-go, and in an adversarial relationship with their original subject, which is really interesting to me. When we first see Becky, Mike is this voice of reason. I'm a Christian, but I want to see politics and everything separate. But when we first see Becky, we use about the most jarring clip of her we could. We have a church service going on where we see in the trailer where the kid had the face paint on, and they've got drums and things. They're doing that. That's how we introduce ourselves to Becky and the subject. So from a filmmaking perspective, this is an exciting way to introduce the subject. It's certainly true. It happened, but it's not going to portray that initial impression is not very positive. Right. And so we automatically kind of slant the viewer towards a certain mindset. Okay, there's a problem here with Becky and her church, and this other guy's the voice of reason. Is it wrong to do that? That's they have an intent, they have a goal. I'm not against their goal of being critical of what Becky's doing, but are they automatically slanting us against the subject? Are they really trying to explore this? Maybe, that's where the issue lies. And in this clip, there's a child that says, "There's never been a generation like this one. The earth is filled with the dead and dying. Now is the time for the glory of the Lord to cover the earth. Now is the time," shout the children in unison. So no contextual information is given about what's going on. And so it's kind of unsettling. And then the first thing we get is a title saying it's the Children's Prayer Conference in Lee's Summit, Missouri. And she gets up, Becky does, the protagonist, begins to speak to the kids about, for the first time in the film, she speaks to them. She tells them the world's very sick, but kids have the power to change it. She then encourages the kids to pray in tongues as unsettling music plays in the background. Children begin to cry, wiggle in the floor, and shout in unknown languages. So a very jarring introduction to a character who is mostly, I think, a good person and has good intentions. I may not agree with her politics necessarily or all of her methods, but she does genuinely care about these children. We do get to see that later on, but we do have the most jarring presentation we could, the most fringe aspect of it right away. And again, that's going to slant your impressions against this person. but it's interesting, it's engaging. A film needs to engage its audience early, so it's part of the hook. So this, there's rightful criticism may be directed against framing your subject in an unflattering way from the get-go, right? And later on, quickly we get to learn more about Becky. She's in a playground and talks about how she can meet kids and have them seeing visions in minutes because they're so open to the gospel. And she does say kids are highly usable in Christianity. And from the way the clips are edited, we really kind of see her as maybe her primary motivation is just using children to accomplish her ideological goals. And I think that's how it's edited for us to get that impression. Is that a fair judgment of her true intentions? I don't think it is, but it meets the needs of the filmmakers and their framing of this film, right? I think it's unethical, but it's not true. But what you leave out sometimes makes things less true because of no context. And there's a couple of more instances that we'll get on in a second. Other scenes in the film that could be jarring without context. There's a point in the film where a lot of people believe that they're praying to a cardboard cutout of George W. Bush. This is not the case, according to Becky, who actually wrote a whole book, basically as a counter to the film and from her perspective. And so, when I did my research for this, not only did I watch the film and watch the commentary track with the filmmakers, I read her book. I looked at any interviews I could with families and people who had been featured in the film to learn more about it, discussions with the filmmakers. And throughout all the interviews, they're not praying to President Bush. They're praying for President Bush. And Becky says they do that for all presidents. And growing up in an even evangelical church that was right-leaning, we still prayed for left-leaning presidents, right? So, I think this is an area here where the filmmakers don't go out of their way to clarify that. And almost everybody that watched the film thought they were maybe praying to George W. Bush, and they weren't. So that happens in the film. You see that, I think, in the trailer, right? You're going to see a lot of this stuff in the trailer that's maybe misleading. There's another part in the film where a speaker asked the children if they want to break a cup representing the power that the enemy has over government. A kid comes up and breaks the cup, and then more cups are broken as children cry, scream, and eerie music plays. A lot of times there's unsettling music that they add to this music to make you feel uncomfortable, to create this, this isn't right, to make you feel that way. And so really a lot of times in my mind, music really, you have to be careful about the placement of music in a film and how it can manipulate people in a documentary. But in this scene, Becky actually explains that kids were asked to bring a topic on a piece of paper that they wanted to break or get rid of, something negative in their life. And so a lot of kids have like parents, alcoholism, divorce, parents with problems or bullying, and they broke the cup with the paper. And they said the filmmakers used the one that had something to do with politics or something. It was like bad government leaders. So that was the one they featured. And then all the kids' reactions for all the sequences are the ones you see for the political thing. Going on here, other things that we want to mention is that, in Christianity, there are a lot of concepts relating to spiritual warfare. And you do see that in the movie and in the church. We see songs that are somewhat militant sometimes, and using concepts like that. And so of course that imagery is definitely in there, and it is true, but are they, is she trying to train people to be a Taliban fighter or carry out a jihad? Not in the same sense we think of Islamic extremists that train to do that, not in that sense. Though she does use some language talking about how in the trailer how they train their kids to do these things. She says we ought to train them for Christ. And so immediately the thinking is, well, she's training them to be part of a militant group, but that's not the case. That's an overextension there of what's going on. But she made that example, right? Not a good example to use. But that happens throughout the film. One of the things that's most ironic about all of this is while none of the people in the film actually carried out any physical violence, in the wake of all the controversy, the facility where the camp was held was actually vandalized and caused over $1,500 in damages. And you could look on YouTube for a while, and you could see a lot of videos made that were violent threats towards Becky Fisher and other people in the film. So there was actually a lot of violence that came towards the subjects of the film because of the anger people felt after watching the movie. Another aspect too is that while a small portion of evangelical churches practice speaking in tongues, The impression that you would get from watching this film is that almost every evangelical church is like this, and that's not the case. And I think that's a little unfair too. That's the only one we see, and we might subconsciously think of this church as representing the entire whole here of the evangelical movement. The biggest thing that is unsettling is there's a clip in the trailer. Who's willing to die for Jesus? And you see all these clips. Me. Becky, the subject, argues that's a complete fabrication. The person that was speaking was a missionary that brought back chocolate bars from his trip. And at one point he asked the kids who wants a chocolate bar. And they claimed that that the reactions of the exuberant children, that was to the chocolate bar question. And you can go watch the film and the way it's edited, and there's cuts, and the way it's cut, that could definitely be the case. And just looking at the way the kids react and smiling and stuff, I'm like, that I believe Becky when she says that really bothers me that made it in the film, that's cut that way, because you wouldn't cut that unless you had to. It would be better to see that whole shot, but you don't see you hear the audio, but you see different shots of kids, and you don't see the filmmaker doing it. So that's a big red flag to me. That's really manipulative, and again, it's featured in the trailer. Another scene in the film and in the trailer that's kind of shocking to hear at first is one of the boys' mothers speaks. She says there are two kinds of people in this world: those who love Jesus and those who don't. And then it cuts. In an interview with Morgan Spurlock, a prominent documentary filmmaker, made Super Size Me, the mother that says that the rest of her response was cut off. She says everybody, and they both deserve love and respect. She said, whether you believe in Jesus or not, you deserve love and respect. She says that was completely cut out of the film, right? So it's her words against the filmmakers, but I've already there's a lot of things that are, that Becky and them claim where, yes, it could be true. And I tend to believe it is, based on just looking at a lot of aspects of the film. Other scenarios in the film are completely orchestrated. And again, it's okay to film things that people normally do, but to encourage things that they don't do is questionable. And one of the biggest things that happens in the film is Ted Haggard shows up, right? And so Ted Haggard was a prominent evangelical pastor, and then it came out that he was very outspoken, very right wing. It came out he was secretly having relationships with male prostitutes and doing drugs. And Ted Haggard shows up. But interestingly enough, the producers of the film paid to have one of the boys and his parents go see Ted Haggard preach and then film it. And then Becky, the subject, the main subject, she didn't even know this happened until she watched a cut of the film. And so this is and in the film, Ted Haggard talks about his relationship with President Bush and how he would talk to him frequently. And so, they are, trying to more strongly show this relationship, that even though it's true that Ted Haggard had a relationship with President Bush, there's this connotation that Becky's connected all this and the boy, and it's orchestrated. It happened, but they set it up. Another scene that happens is it shows Levi and several children protesting abortion at Washington, D.C. The children put red tape over their mouths with the word life written on it. And how did this happen? The filmmakers said they needed more footage to tell their story, and they asked Becky's group of kids to go to D.C. and protest alongside a speaker who had come to their church before. So the speaker had come to the church, but the filmmakers wanted them to go protest this, to film it. So they actually encouraged the political activism in the film, that they made this film to try to highlight what they believe is the dangers of political activism in the far right, but they've actually created it to film it. So it's just you're arguing against yourself there. You're creating a problem. You're making a problem to create a film about, or at least heightening it. So in one of the final scenes that happened, Becky calls into the radio show to talk to Mike, the guy we mentioned at the beginning of the movie, who's set up to be the person highlighting the voice of reason. She never wanted to call into the show. She didn't want to talk to him, but they wanted her to call in to get an argument between her and him for the film. So she calls in, and she's very animated and gets into it. But this behavior is not normal for her. She normally wouldn't be confrontational on the radio with this person. Now, these are her views. Everything she says is true, but we believe that she's the kind of person that would call in and do this when she's really not. The filmmakers want to argue it's a fair piece, but there's just so much stuff that's manipulative in terms of the editing, so many things they leave out, that it really bothers me. And so, I think we get a stronger negative portrait of these subjects than we otherwise would without some of what they're doing. And that's my biggest issue with the film. That being said, I think it's a very entertaining movie. I think those of you that are interested in modern conservative religion, modern evangelicalism, and the role that it's playing in politics, it's certainly interesting. And again, these are a documentary film. This is something we talk about in my class all the time. A documentary film is a representation of reality. It is not reality itself. It's a version of reality. All documentary films have a perspective. The perspective is the one that the filmmaker has. The filmmaker's perspective is shown through what they choose to show and not show. And that makes all the difference in the world. So you're only getting a portion of it. Okay. And so you're going to, if you're trying to create a film that stirs people up, you're going to see the worst of it. And you may even, like in this case, they've engineered scenes to occur to heighten tension, to create a theme. Every film needs a theme, a spine, like a narrative to see it through. And so this film's theme is politics in religion. And that's what we see. And so the things that they're concerned about, the filmmakers that they have concerns about, are certainly valid. I think we can look at the state of the country and see what's happened to, I think, a lot of good people, otherwise good people in the evangelical movement, that have become obsessed with politics, and I think have put that even before God in a lot of cases. I'll say it as someone from churches like that, and it's we're all trying to figure out our way. Hopefully, we're all stumbling in the right direction, but we can see the dangers of nationalism and Trumpism, and when we put politics over Christ, as a Christian, I say that, and I think we need to watch all media with a critical eye and question how it's constructed and what the people are trying to accomplish, even if we agree with their message. But sometimes the ends does not justify the means. And in conclusion, I think there are some unethical editing practices and creative decisions in this film that I would discourage other documentary filmmakers from doing. But overall, is the criticism that the filmmakers have of the subject valid? Are their concerns valid? I would agree. But you don't really go about that in that way, in my mind, based on the research I've seen and done. So that's my presentation. Thank y'all for bearing with me on that, and I hope you enjoyed it. I tried not to just read my paper, but hit the high points. But I'm fascinated with this film. Fascinated with documentary films and representation, and what things are left in, what things are left out, how that influences the viewer, and be more than happy to take questions.
Well, I know, Andrew, we already have one comment, and this is really fascinating. You really helped me kind of expand my intake of documentaries and films, and beyond just this particular film, just thinking about all the things that are being left out. But one person has shared the idea of Appalachian stereotyping, how often it's associated with the preeminence of evangelicals in the region, and maybe how that's not fair, right? Even to our region, and the story that we tell about Appalachia. But I did have a question about the, you said how the documentary maker kind of manufactured some events, paying for Becky's group to go to DC, and if Becky is this innocent, children's minister who just wants her kids to love Jesus, why does she allow such things like that?
Well, that's a fair question. See, she's, she willingly goes along with it, but they're urging her, they're pushing her to do that. And she does believe, she still believes in the film, and she still does. Let me mention that too. Her, ultimately, she says that, in her book, she has, she felt betrayed at times in how she was represented, but she's never denounced the film and continues to support it, and her ministry. And so she disagrees with the framing, but still believes there's misrepresentations, but she harbors no ill will towards the filmmakers. And she believes that the film turned out exactly as God wanted it to, according to her. But I agree with you, ultimately, if that's something you're totally against, you wouldn't do it. So, it's something that she's willing to do, but is it ethical to urge someone to do something they're not already doing? I call into question that. But I agree with you, it is something that she does. They are taking kids to protest a political topic. Is it okay for kids to protest? I'd like to know that a kid genuinely believes in something. I don't want to take away the rights of a child that genuinely believes something, but we want to make sure we're presenting a topic in a fair and balanced situation in all its complexities, and not just using children to accomplish a political agenda.
Yeah, it's very fair. I'm curious from those who have been with us today, questions you might have. Maybe unmute yourself or put something in the chat box. Do you have any questions you want to share with Professor Reed?
I appreciate everybody coming out. There's a lot of familiar names here from classes and some colleagues, and so I really appreciate that. It's fun to share some of our work and discuss our interests. I do encourage people to watch the film. I think it's an interesting film, and if you don't have a lot of insight into the evangelical movement, if that's not something you grew up in, or even if it is, it's interesting to kind of watch and kind of view these things from a different lens. Being older and evaluating those things. So I think it's an interesting film. It's fun the right word. It's an interesting film. Yes, Jesus Camp is the name of the film. It's free on like YouTube TV. It's on YouTube for free with ads. I think it's on Pluto and a few others. You can just Google it.
So I have one other question then. So I have so many things in my mind about the filmmaker. What you said, Low Key Films, is that who created this documentary?
Low Key, yes.
Yeah. It feels like they did so many unethical things in the production of this. I mean, as a fellow filmmaker, what would you say to them when they produce this?
I like I said in the talk, I don't like encouraging people to do things they wouldn't normally do, or paying for them to do things that they weren't planning on doing. That's what I don't like. Engineering scenarios and conflict. That's where you get into reality television. That's what reality television is. It's creating scenarios and having people go through them. A documentary is trying to capture life as best you can. A good question here. How do you feel like their movement differs because they use kids rather than adults? So, this is a good question. So obviously, I don't think there's anything wrong with at all with educating a child in Scripture and the Bible and any religious viewpoint. That's the right of a parent to try to best educate their child how they see fit. I believe in that. When you encourage activism, though, I do agree that using kids and not explaining complexity of issues and letting them make up their mind for their own, that is a little bit touchy. I'm not necessarily a fan of that, but I also don't want to remove the right of a young person that is intelligent enough to analyze a situation, just like I wouldn't, I'm not against anybody going out that's a child to march in a Black Lives Matter rally. I wouldn't say, well, you're a kid, you can't go march for Black Lives or whatever. Like, I'm not going to let the topic be the reason whether or not a kid can go protest. But the role, yes, the kids are younger, more easily manipulative, and it's not fair to just try to use kids to accomplish a political agenda. If they genuinely believe in it, it's one thing. And I do think Becky's mission is not primarily political. I think these are things they believe in, but I think her end game is trying to help raise kids and give them a foundation in Christ to live a meaningful life. I think that's her end game. That's her goal. And I think, though, in some cases, though, it's, it gets kind of bogged down in politics, like a lot of good people have been, that many of you probably know. Yeah, other questions?
And if we were to further on with this study of faith in film, is there any other film that you would recommend to say, hey, here'd be something else for you to kind of dive in and think about?
Yeah. A really great documentary film showcasing what a Christian life can accomplish and do is The Dropbox, which is a film about South Korea. I believe it's in South Korea, a man that he wanted to address the problem of abandoned babies and in his village, in his area. And he decided to put a box up that had like an alarm in it, a bell, that if a mother wanted to abandon her baby and she'd made up her mind already and was going to do that, she didn't have to just leave it somewhere and hope nobody would find it. But he actually has an orphanage and people bring babies there and leave them in the little box, and then they ring the bell, and then they comes out and gets them. But he raises like 30 or 40 kids, and most of them have special needs. It's heartwarming, and it's a good showcase of what I think of what Christian love is and can accomplish. But it's a very moving, very moving film, very well made film.
Awesome. Well, this is so great. I mean, not only have you given us a great topic to think about, but here you are at home battling COVID, and I just